Okay, the second part of our lesson begins at this second property of the least squares residual line. What they're telling us is we can use this formula to calculate the slope of our least squares regression line. The thing about this formula, though, is you need your data set or you need to be given these values. Because what they are asking you to use is the correlation of your data multiplied by the ratio that is the standard deviation of your y variable and the standard deviation of your x variable. So we either have to have the data set or we have to be given these values. So if we go to our next page, we're going to have a couple of opportunities to calculate our least squares regression line for ourselves. Now, we're not using the same process as squaring the residuals and all that. We are using data from our data sets or information from our data sets to calculate our least squares regression line. We are going to use the Ford F-150 Super Crew data. This up here where it says we have data, we need to put the word if in front of that. If we have data on our explanatory and response variable, we can use these descriptive statistics to calculate our least squares regression line using these formulas. So down here for our used Ford F-150 data, I want to make sure it's clear what values we're going to find. So for X bar, this is the average miles driven. What's another word for average? Starts with an M. Mean. So in your can you do, you're going to be given the mean value. That's the same thing as the average value. Y is going to be your average price. S sub X is the standard deviation of miles driven. And S sub Y is the standard deviation of price. So we need to have all of this info to use this formula. We're also going to need R. I've just put him over to the side. We're going to need R by the time that we're done. So I'm going to show you how to find these values using your calculator, just in case it's not provided to you. So the data is on this regression line lesson. I'm going to freeze it on my screen for you, but I would recommend that you find it and be able to touch it so that when you calculate it, you're getting accurate values, because if you just use my screen, I feel like you might mess up. But you're welcome to. So I'm going to freeze it on my screen, and I want you to take a couple of minutes to enter this into your calculator. You're entering in miles driven and price, two separate lists. Got a couple of minutes. another minute or so to get your data in. About 30. Roughly 20. About 10. Okay, so the buttons that we use in our calculator to get this information are Stat, Calc, and this is the first time we are using option 2. Option 2 is 2 variable stats. So what that means is it's going to give you the summary statistics for 2 different variables. And in this case, it's going to be for your miles driven and your price. So in our calculator, we hit Stat, Calc, 2, select your appropriate lists, enter through, and now the first set of info is your X value info. And the second set is your Y value info. So we've seen this before, except for we did this in quantitative data, and it's when we were like making box plots and we needed the 5 summary stats for one data set. Since we're estimating our line, whenever you're estimating anything, the more decimal places you include, the more accurate your prediction or your number will be. So I'm going to go to at least 1 decimal place for my values. The average miles driven is 63979.5. Average price was 27833.7. Standard deviation of the miles driven is 478. I feel like I have the wrong number. 76.5. Can you guys see why I thought I had the wrong number? Our average price is $64,000 and our standard deviation is 48,000. On average, our points are 48,000 miles away from the average. That's a huge standard deviation. Would you agree? Pretty sure I calculated it right though. Then our standard deviation of our price is 9.5. Okay, ran out of space, I'm not sure where, but what we're doing now is calculating slope. The kids told me that I had this decimal wrong on standard deviation of X. It should be 0.8, not 0.5. So if you plug that into your calculator, you should get, I'm going to write down 3 decimal places, so I'm getting negative 0.163. Now we calculate slope next, just kidding, that's y-intercept, sorry. We calculate y-intercept next because you need slope to find it. If we look at this formula for y-intercept, you have to use slope in the formula. So we take our average y value, 27833.7, subtract, and now be careful here because it's negative 0.163. That's the slope you just found, multiplied by your average x value, 63979.5. So this is your y-intercept. When you plug this in your calculator, be careful that your negative and your minus look different. In your calculator, they are two different symbols. So be careful with that. Give you about 30 seconds, then we'll check in on your value. About 15. $10. I'm getting 38262.4. Anybody else get that value? Yeah. So our last step is to write our line of regression. So we're going to say y hat equals 38262.4 minus, because our slope is negative, 0.163x, where x is miles driven and y hat is predicted price. Remember, whenever you write a regression line, if it's a free response question, you always have to define your variables. If it's a multiple choice, you get lucky and can just select the answer. The last one says, compare this equation with the equation given by your calculator, which I have memorized because I've done this problem so many times. So the calculator gave us 38257 minus 0.16x. So how'd we do? We pretty close to the same? Yes. We're very close. If we're going to compare them, that means we're very close. They're about the same. Our slopes are the same. Our y-intercepts are off by $5. And when we're talking about $38,000, $5 is negligible. That's a very small amount to be off by. You're okay on this? Good news is, most of the time, they just give you the data. So most of the time, it's like number 2. They give you everything that you need. Your averages, your standard deviations, and your R, and you only have to do this part where you calculate. So you guys try number 2 now. You are going to find the regression line predicting your hours of study time and your GPA. No, your hours of sleep time and your GPA. I'm going to write mine out and then I'm going to come walk through to see how you're doing, and we'll check in like 2 to 3 minutes. If you're at home, I'm remembering to pause the video. So I'll pause now. You can pause your video and then come back when you're ready to check answer. Okay, I have 2.4 plus 0.16, where X is hours of sleep and Y hat is predicted GPA. You could have left it with all these decimals and gotten 100%. So 2.4298 plus 0.167, 1617X. So not too bad, right? Not too bad. True? We actually get to do math. I'm glad we get to do math. So you have one lesson question. I'll leave that up, sorry. You have one lesson question, and it's a multiple choice. So it's the same setup, except for instead of it being a free response, it's multiple choice. And then in your can you do, you'll have a couple of questions that are like this. But then all of the other questions basically are just going to be review for your Unit 4 test, because we've been working with our regression line for a while. Now we just know why it's called the least squares regression line. Does that make sense? Yeah? So we have almost 30 minutes. And if you guys stay focused, you could probably get it done before you go. Ready, break.